Hello and good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jane Cowan. I'm pleased to be here today representing the UK Water Reuse Association. It's great to see so many of you joining us for this very important discussion. Today's webinar, Enabling Water Smart Communities, is being delivered in partnership with the UKWRA as part of Water Reuse Week 2025. Over the next hour, we will be exploring how we can build more sustainable, resilient and water smart communities across the whole of the United Kingdom. As we all know, the challenges around water are growing. By working together and sharing best practice, we can make water reuse and water smart solutions part of everyday life in our homes, businesses and communities. At the UKWRA, we aim to bring together experts and policymakers to support exactly this kind of discussion. I would like to put on record my sincere thanks to our colleagues from the Enabling Water Smart Communities project for leading today's session and everybody else for making the time to be here. Please can I encourage you to engage and ask questions at the end of the session. And I'm very pleased shortly to hand over to our speakers who will guide us through today's session, and then I will see you again at the end for the question and answer session. So there's just a little bit of general housekeeping, just so everybody know the meeting will be recorded, and if you have any objections to the recording being made public, please do let us know. There's no obligation for attendees to turn on their cameras or microphones, that's just for the speakers. If you experience any technical issues and need assistance, please raise your hand and use the chat feature on Zoom and let us know what the problem is and what help is required. We will take your questions at the end of the presentation, and if you'd like to put a question or make a comment about the talk, please use the Q&A facility on Zoom and not the chat facility, please. And when asking your question, please state who you are and who you are posing the question to. Here's the speakers and the panel today. There's Storm Rushworth from SDS Infrastructure, Lutz Johan from Equality, George Warren from Anglian Water and Matt Hull representing Storm Savers. Okay, we'd like to start with Storm Rushworth and his presentation, please.
Excellent. Good afternoon. I've got a bit. I'm Storm and I work as part of the water reuse team for SDS. I'm based in Somerset and we specialise in water and water management systems from design, manufacture, installation and maintenance of the systems. We collect, treat and store, reuse and release water, depending on the regulations, including stormwater, surface water runoff, grey water, rainwater harvesting, flood prevention and pollution control. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'm going to start with the future projections and where the stress will be the greatest with water scarcity. Currently, the UK is facing unprecedented and uncertain times for its water scarcity issues. England faces 5 billion litres a day shortfall for public water supplies by 2025 and a further 1 billion litres a day deficit for the wider economy. Pressures caused by climate change, growing population and emerging technologies will all impact our environment and our water supply. England's public water supply could fall short of 5 billion litres a day by 2050 without any urgent action or future-proofing our resources. And this has been warned to us by the Environmental Agency. By 2030, several regions in England could face severe water stress, and especially with our demand as that increases with our population growth. And by 2040, the whole of the South and Midlands are projected to be under severe water stress. Overall, supply reductions of 10 to 15% are projected for under the current climate change trajectories. And this has had impacts on our river supplies, with summer flows of up to 80% in worst case scenarios. Increased frequency of severe droughts are requiring water restrictions, and we're seeing that throughout the country. And it's going to become more prevalent, obviously, as things worsen. Estimates now suggest in 2050, there's a chance of such droughts being in either between 1 to 7 or 1 in 4 for England, depending on the region. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with climate change. One of the things I'm very fond of, and it's kind of my background and why I started this whole kind of career. We're witnessing a growing increase, obviously, in the increased intensity of extreme weather across the UK. We're seeing more widespread flooding events, and the unusual occurrences such as cyclonic systems are actually becoming more common and disruptive. I think up the north, we've seen a couple of incidents where some houses have actually been damaged by cyclones, which I never would predict that would be a factor. Climate change is a driver of these shifts, and with these rising global temperatures directly affecting our atmospheric and ocean systems. One of the most significant concerns and often missed is actually the weakening of the Gulf Stream, which plays a crucial role in regulating the UK's climate. Disruptions to the current Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC as it's called, could intensify the severity of the weather extremes. Given the UK's geographical position of being an island, the Gulf Stream can impact our weather significantly, and we've seen that kind of over the last couple of years, I'd say. With the warming oceans and a higher concentration of carbon dioxide, this will all intensify the greenhouse factor and could lead to a tipping point, which could be harder to rectify effectively just from the UK and might need wider scale intervention. Reservoirs levels have fallen. I saw up in Scotland, if you can believe, they were actually struggling with a reservoir that was falling lower than it ever has before. And with prolonged droughts that we've seen kind of over the last summer, the intensity on our water resources is becoming more and more frequent. Rivers flows, as I said, in summer has also been reducing. So there is a knock-on effect to our aquatic ecosystems as lower oxygen and higher water temperatures will also impact agriculture and industrial uses. So the impacts from this is obviously the reservoirs have been greatly diminished in England and Wales. Periods of drought are already happening more frequently. Severe heavy rain and storm surges are also a major factor for our water networks, as they're not designed to obviously account for this much demand and the amount of water that's obviously happening in these storm surges. Next slide, please. I'm going to bring up some policies. So there's lots happened in the last year in the water policy framework. Currently, the UK policy environment remains rigid and slow moving. However, there's a lot of work going on currently with enabling smart water communities as being a pioneer to help push and make these changes in Parliament. Despite proven technologies and successful intervention models, there's still no clear regulatory framework for water reuse. However, it is in a very, very tangible solution, and it's something that we've been doing for years and years and years, and we've taught other countries how to do it. So in theory, we should be getting to a point where this could be our solution to our climate needs for our water resources and bolstering our water resources. We're currently governed by the British Standard, and the code for water reuse systems is the BS 8595, and it's only been reviewed in 2013. So it's quite outdated, and we've moved along from there. Another policy that kind of came up during my earlier days, or a new thing that came in, was with water neutrality. This kind of was a big risk for developers, as they could not increase the rate of water extraction from drinking water supplies above the existing level. Sometimes alongside with connections, it can impact planning, and we've seen kind of in the water neutrality state, planning has kind of been withheld. So there is a lot more of an incentive now to kind of push water reuse as a solution to help bolster that planning aspect. The Cunliffe review came in to play in July 2025, and it was kind of the first real, I'd say, national view on water, which was chaired by Sir John Cunliffe, and that happened in July 2025. The response was widespread public concern over issues such as sewage and pollution, and he came up with a number of recommendations, and one of those was water reuse. The SUDS legislation in 2025, the new national standards, did include water reuse as effectively a solution, and was encouraged to be used.
Here we may have lost Storm in this. Hopefully it's not due to the storm. Uh, I think maybe Jane, if should we nip on to the next slide then, if that's possible, please. We may have to keep going until we get on to Lutz's piece, if that's possible, which I think is the next slide. Do you want to go?
Yeah, if you want to. Shall I take over from here? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm Lucian from the company Air Quality. I'm also chairman of the British Standard. So let me quickly correct Storm there. The British Standard currently, the actual one is the BSEN 16941-1 and 2 for rainwater and grey water. And it's currently been even, the rainwater one was reviewed in 2024. So we're quite on top of things, I think, on the standard side, although, appreciate good to do some tweaking elements, but yeah, that's another discussion. So today I wanted to touch on, kind of practice, show something in action. Could you move to the next slide? But before, of course, I go into, detailed case studies, I just need to kind of say, like, what is rainwater harvesting at all for people that might, not be most familiar with it. So rainwater harvesting as basic, here's a domestic examples where the water is simply taken off the roof, filtered, and then stored in a tank and then pumped back to the applications like toilet flushing, washing machine, irrigation purposes. In domestic environment, this next slide. In a commercial environment, that of course could include vehicle washing and other applications that don't need potable water. The systems, basically are the same, water from the roof being used for those applications. Next slide, please. There is a new trend towards residential systems in order to maybe have larger developments being supplied by a single system, which I'm going to have a case study on, the ones that a lot of people already know about. So that's something that is potentially up and coming. Hopefully the water regulations will enable us in the future to do these kind of things a little bit more scale. Next slide, please. And then we look into grey water recycling as a means of, in high density environment where you don't have as much roof area. Often grey water is a good solution. Grey water, which means water from hand wash basins, showers, and potentially washing machines being reused for the same applications as rainwater harvesting. As I said, I don't want to go in too much detail because of course also the treatment processes from different suppliers are slightly different. I would, tell everybody to just probably talk to suppliers directly when you want to have some more technical information. Because I'd like to join or just move over into the case studies, which I think it's probably a little bit more interesting. Could we move to the next slide? And I'd like to start with a domestic case study because I think that's often a little bit overlooked. Single house on plots, the systems where you can collect the water off your roof and using it again, as I mentioned before, for these different applications. In this case here, the system went in, including a SUTS feature. So the tank that has been installed not only harvest water for rainwater harvesting and reuse, it also makes space for stormwater. Yeah, so in this case here, the system has an outflow restriction of 1.9 liters a second with an office plate. So when the water hits the tank, it will be retained and only slowly relieved if there is an excess of water that's not being used potentially by the building itself. It's a small system, 155 square meters. Next slide, please. The nice thing of that case study here is it's been all recorded. So which I think is one of the things why I chose those case studies. I'm going to show you we have data on those systems because a lot of times people say like, yeah, what do these systems really do? And there you're going to have data available, seeing the water savings. As you can see here, the system uses the water not only for toilets, but also for washing machines and what water has been held back in that kind of time period. Next slide, please. This is the communal rainwater, or what I would call stormwater harvesting system. The difference here is that we're not only collecting the water from roof areas, but also from hard standing areas. And particularly in this case, as I mentioned, this is a centralized system supplying a community of 208 units in Cambridge. The speciality of course, as I mentioned, is the water has been collected from hard standing area, which means the water quality is much worse, or the water is polluted compared to water from roofs. Hence, the treatment process had to be a little bit more intense to get the water quality to the right quality to supply it back to the toilets. In this case, next slide, please. This water's been collected centrally in this central part of the development via a reed bed that does a fantastic job since 2018. When this development's been going live. By the way, it was aiming for the code for sustainable homes of 80 liters at the time. That's why that was the driver behind doing the system in the first place. And I have to give it to Cambridge Council that they wanted this system to be in place. The system so collected via that reed bed that cleans the water before it goes into a 250 cubic meter tank and then is pumped into a plant room. Next slide, please. That is then polishing the water to then be resupplied to all the applications. So this system, as I mentioned, has been running since 2018 and has been on average saving about 4,000 to 5,000 liters. 5,000 cubic meters a year, which is a quite substantial amount of the water. And lessons learned in this case is that we found out that not all of the water is ending up in the reed bed. 2 or 3 of these quad elements, these apartment blocks that you've seen, their drainage systems are leaking. These drainage channels, there's a picture there, are leaking, so the water is literally going into the ground instead of hitting the reed bed and going into the tank. So the overall effectiveness of the system is slightly reduced. Nevertheless, of course, all water going through the system, and since the unit is remotely monitored, we can tell that hardly anything, if not nothing, of the rainwater hits the sewer system. So we're getting up to 0 discharge, which is of course very interesting from the SUT's point of view as well. Can we move on, please? So that was part of the, that was the communal stormwater harvesting system. Now we have a little example of a commercial building in London. Interested of this one is it's using an intelligent weather control system to control tanks that will do 2 things. They will not only hold the rainwater for use, but it also will manage flood events, okay? The building, 15-story building, quite high in the middle, right next to the walkie-talkie tower, literally, which has a nice green space on top, which was another issue on this site. It was a green roof element, as you can see in the picture, meaning there's a potential of discoloration and, of course, reduced flow into the system itself. AIM was getting to BREEAM Excellent. Next slide, please. And therefore, they didn't only do the rainwater harvesting, but had to incorporate grey water recycling to get to those numbers. The rainwater tanks in total is 100 cubic meters in 2 separate tanks, one on the 14th floor, which is the irrigation tank, and one in the basement -B4. As you can see, there's a little slide of the weather control dashboard, and it shows you how the system operates. It literally controls the outflow of the tank. So whenever there's a small rainfall event, and we know that the tank can hold the water, the system doesn't let any water go and holds it back into the tank. If there's too much water coming and the tank is too full, so it needs to have some space, the valve gets activated and drains the tank down. So you can see on that picture here, you can see the weather forecast, the peaks there in blue, and you can see that the valve activates in front of the storm, so it makes space in the tank at that moment. Can you click again, because there should be another slide coming. There you see the same, it's literally the same dashboard, just showing how the tank is drained down when the valve is activated and how the rain every time in between fills the tank up again, because this whole system is trying to keep the tank as full as possible. Now, this is the irrigation tank that was in the September time, so the irrigation system wasn't working. So there was no real use on the system itself. But in the basement, next slide, we have a system that will supply the toilets at the same time. Here you can see a slide, probably quite small, but I've highlighted the tank was already 60 cubic meter full on a Monday morning, but you can see how the water level declines quite dramatically. 33 cubic meters of that water go in a single day into this building, 2,000 people occupancy. And you can see this is a whole week, which is very, very rainy week, because you can see that water is constantly coming into the tank and going out. So the point is there, every time water comes in, next morning, people come into the office, the water's being used again. And then over the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, tank fills, and on Monday morning, the water is being used again. Nice thing of that project is that no water ever left the building into the sewer system via the surface water drain, because the building was, the occupancy would just take any water. Unfortunately, of course, when COVID hit, that was not the case anymore. One lesson learned is really interesting, or literally probably two things. These weather control systems allow an adjustment of how they operate. So while you can monitor, because you get daily data, you can monitor how the system operates. And we found out that the initial calculations we've done in terms of managing this water in the tank weren't completely correct, because when we then measured rainfall against how the tank was acting, the green roof was holding more water back than we anticipated. So the tanks weren't really filling up because the system overdrained. So we were able to then update the system, and the system now works much more efficient. So there's a future proofing in this and adjustable to, potentially even climate change elements. Another point is that there is an irrigation system on the green roof, and therefore, next slide, please. We found out that during summertime, when this irrigation system works, a lot of water is not being taken up by the plants, but drains down into the system. And as you can see there, although it's not raining, the system is heavily activated because it has to drain down the tank to not let it overflow. But all of this water is still being used in the toilets, which is a good thing. That water would normally be wasted. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's my final slide on a commercial project in London, grey water recycling combined with rainwater harvesting. System being monitored already since 2021. And it's just an element where we can show that the system enables the building to save 43% on average on toilet flushing demand in that environment. That's the only thing I wanted to really quickly point out, because I'm probably running out of time. Yeah, so these are case studies that should just show that, we have we have practical experience in things of the association to provide information that these systems do what they say, and that's very important to create, some credibility, especially for policymakers. So I hope that you found that interesting. I'll, take the questions later on. Thank you very much, and I hand over, I think, to George.
Cheers, Lutz. Thank you for that. And I believe that Storm's laptop may have died during it, but he's back with us, so we may catch up with his final slide afterwards. So afternoon all, I'm George Warren. I'm the Integrated Water Manager at Anglian Water. And I'm going to run through some stuff that we've been doing in enabling water smart communities. So I'll give you a quick project overview. Apologies for those on the call who are quite familiar with it now. Quite frankly, I'm pleased to hear if that is the case. We'll run through some of the work that we've done around water reuse and just touch on some of the other work streams. Could I have the next slide, please, Jane? So enabling water smart communities, what the hell is it? Well, it's an Ofwat innovation funded project. We set up about 3 years ago now in collaboration with a whole heap of project delivery partners, as you can see there. So Anglian Water lead it with our principal delivery partner in Arup, and United Utilities, Thames Water, other water companies involved in it. We have academic partners, so you can see there, and CIWEM are also a key partner in terms of our communications aspects. And you can see a load of other logos there. The idea of the project effectively is to identify and then break down some of the barriers associated with trying to deliver integrated water management in new residential development. We have an independent program board, which we meet with on a quarterly basis. It's not necessarily that we are reporting to them. It's more that they help ensure that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, that we're aware of opportunities that might be arising, such as upcoming consultations, or to make sure that we get the right timings on these things, and also to become our champions, quite frankly, so that they can promote the work in their various fields. So you can see there it's made up of a whole heap of government departments and quangos, as well as representation from the development industry. Could I have the next slide, please? So for those of you who are not familiar with it, you're possibly asking the question, what on earth is a water smart community? Well, I can tell you, it probably took us about 12 months to come up with this definition. I can imagine that if we all sat in the room again, we might come up with something slightly different. I won't read it out to you, but I mean, essentially, it's where water-related assets and systems such as rainwater harvesting and SUDs are included in the design stage and built into the fabrication of a place. It's also about members of the community understanding, valuing, and taking ownership of those assets and systems, so enhance the value of water and they cultivate more sustainable water use. Hopefully it's the sort of place that people want to live. I would imagine it is, and certainly if you've ever visited Clay Farm or Eddington, you're probably thinking, how do I get my hands on one of those properties? Right, can I have the next slide, please? I'm not going to dwell on this too long because I think Storm has done a far better version than I on this, but it won't have passed people's notice that this government is quite into growth, and with having dramatically increased the housing demand numbers that they want to see. That it comes at a time when also there is less water that water companies are able to extract from the environment. Understandably so, to leave more in the environment for its sake. So we've got a bit of a problem there from a water resources perspective. Also got a problem when it comes to the drainage side of things. It won't have escaped attention, the storm overflows issues that the industry is facing, as well as the flooding issues. And that, as Storm has gone through here, is only likely to increase. And in the near future with increased intensity associated with rainfall. So we need to find a route as an industry, as a country, quite frankly, to be able to manage this rainwater far better. And this is where we believe that water smart communities really come in. Can I have the next slide, please? So just to give you a bit of understanding how the project was set up, we spent the first year or so just trying to scour, I guess, academic journals, industry papers, have conversations with the relevant people, both in the UK and abroad, to understand what was going on. So we did a whole discovery phase there. And then we have tried to hone that down and understand what the key areas of potential barriers are. We actually came up with 65 enabling actions off the back of that research. So if you were to address all 65, we believe that it would be a shoe-in for water smart communities to be delivered across the country. We are not committing as part of this project to try and address all 65. We're highlighting them. We are addressing many of them, in fact. But we know this is a lifetime's work in many respects. But it can't just be delivered through the small numbers that we have in our project team. We need lots of people to be leaning in on it. So we've prioritized those, and we've kind of divvied them up into 3 key areas around stewardship, values, and assets. We find that it's quite a useful way to understand the different areas of complexion. If we go to the next slide, give us some idea as to what these enabling action projects are, because I can appreciate this all might sound a bit high in the sky. But we've been looking at, for instance, stewardship models for water smart communities. Who owns and adopts these things? Who maintains them? What the impact might be on sewer system and the sewage treatment works from a reduced water consumption. Is it, it's a higher concentration, lower flows? What are the impact on the sewers and the receiving water treatment centre? Looking at how people value water, for one, how it might be financed, and I will now really go into detail on the water reuse side, because I'm hoping that's what you come here for on the basis of the title and it being Water Reuse Week. So let's get cracking with that next bit then. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'll start by linking this to growth, because it's quite a good way of getting government's attention right now. So a study that was commissioned by ourselves, carried out by Public First, looked at what the impact in the south and east of the country might be from a water scarcity perspective, and what that might, and how water reuse, or rather water reuse within a water smart community, could help to ensure that actually some of this growth could occur. So initially, it identified that with the current predictions, with that additional 1.5 million homes, and the impact on the south and east of this country, there was a water scarcity challenge that meant that 61,500 of those homes within this government term wouldn't be able to be delivered due to water scarcity. Now, if those homes, along with all the other additional homes that were due to be built, were to be delivered at 30% and more efficient, i.e. In per capita consumption terms of 80 litres per person per day style homes, that would likely need to include water reuse, then actually 49,000 of those lost homes could be built. The reason I say this, and it possibly sounds like a load of numbers and you're going, what on earth is this all about? Water reuse, if we actually mandated water reuse within new development, could enable a lot of this growth to occur that's currently being blocked. And I think it's a really key message that we need to get across. Could I have the next slide, please? We also said about looking at what is the case for this. So how might this happen from a roadmap perspective? So we looked at the various different things that needed to come in. So, you know, we tried to work out what we need to understand. So do we need to understand what the public perception might be? More of that in a second. What the costings might be. That again. Whether there's a skills shortage and how we might address this. Again, I will touch on that in a second too. And as I've said, the impact on low flows on sewers and what that might be. Then we're working on that at the minute, due to be released shortly. But the biggest barrier, and we've already touched on it briefly, is the regulations at the present time. And I'm sure Storm was about to go into this in quite some depth. But we've got some real blockers, but we've got some opportunities on the horizon too. So there's the review of the building regs Part G, expected imminently. I feel like I'm a stuck record. I think I've been saying that since February, if not before. Let's hope it is coming soon. I know it's a hard thing to do, but let's hope that it's in. And there is a great opportunity there for the review and the amendments to Building Regs Part G to potentially be stronger on water reuse. There is the mandatory water efficiency labelling scheme, which again, I've probably been saying that for about 4 years, is imminent, but we understand it's due to be laid in Parliament in front of Parliament in November, and then it will be adopted as a scheme in April 2026. This is a real coup, actually. It will be great to have it in there. It will make, it will hopefully mean that we can move away from the discussions around 80, 85, 90 litres per person per day, because actually they're quite spurious numbers. What you can do is make it water efficient and say, we want water efficient devices and a minimum rating of B or C or A for that matter. And it's a lot easier to audit in that regard. The mandatory water efficiency labelling scheme, though, won't necessarily be encouraging reuse, but I think in combination, the two together can deliver you those very high efficient and water efficient homes. The Independent Water Commission, and I think this was touched on as well, promoted water reuse within it, which is great to see. It was lovely to see Enabling Water Smart Communities specifically referenced within that within the Cunliffe Review, and it's likely to be taken forward into the latest government white paper, we hope, on that regard. But all of this requires quite a major change, and that's around the wholesome water issue. And this requires, and can I, if you could press spacebar, I think probably. So this requires a fair, I'm not sure what's happened here. It was coming eventually. Keep going. Hopefully it will just come up. There we go. Anyway, there's a series of regulations that need to be changed. And at the minute it's preventing water suppliers from providing anything other than drinking quality water. This is an interpretation from our Drinking Water Inspectorate. I completely understand it. They need to have a risk-based approach to this, but there are some things and some guidance and some new standards that could be developed to help alleviate these issues. And we're looking to try and support on that. Once that's addressed, then we should be able to start delivering these community scale systems that Lutz highlighted in terms of Clay Farm before. At the present time, if you tried to deliver Clay Farm today, you would struggle with that. And this is a real issue that we need to get over. DWI have given us the indication they're positive towards this change. It will need some changes as well with DEFRA. So hopefully that will be seen shortly after the building regs review. Could I have the next slide, please? Yep, here we go. So in terms of public opinion, we did a poll of just over 4,000 people, representative of the UK population in terms of their demographics, and basically set about asking them lots of questions about water, of which we then led on to water reuse. Unsurprisingly, water was not top of their priority list right now. And I should say this poll was carried out towards the end of last calendar year. But what was interesting was people's acceptance towards the use of alternative sources of water for certain uses within the home. You can see here that like rainwater in particular was favoured for things like flushing of toilets and laundry, with over 80% acceptance for the flushing of toilets with rainwater, and actually fairly high acceptance for some of those other sources. Hopefully you can see it, and it's not too small on your screens there, but you can see how grey water and the likes were fairly high. I think it's fair to say that black water is still a struggle for a lot of people, but I think there's a perception element there, and I'm sure people have heard the various statistics. I've had various numbers being spouted around if you're living in London as to how many times water is being through a person before it gets to your glass. But yeah, it's just a perception aspect there, which I think possibly needs to be got over, but actually there seems to be lower hanging fruit in the form of rainwater and grey water in that regard. This was actually then corroborated by a piece of work that University of Manchester did on behalf of the project, looking at this and the various nuances around it. All this information, I should say, the QR codes are on each of these slides, and they can all be found, all these reports can be found on the Enabling Water Smart Communities website. Could I have the next slide, please, whilst I take a sip of water? One of the big things, so normally people go, the public don't want it, don't like it, and you go, well, okay, I think we've kind of shown there that maybe they do, and they're not so averse to it. Next one is always, well, it's going to cost too much to incorporate. So we did a piece of work looking at the capital costs, and comparing it to conventional and what the additional cost might be to provide the dual pipe systems that may be needed for non-potable water provision, both on a community scale and within on an individual house by house basis, like Let's showed earlier as well. And we looked at 12 developments and 9 different property typologies, ranging from I think it was 40 homes up to 300 home developments, and 1-bedroom apartments up to 5-bedroom detached homes. Long and short of it, community scale grey water recycling, heavily influenced by density. Not surprisingly, it's around this additional £6,000 per property additional cost. For community scale, for those lower density, but high density, actually it's down to around £2,500 additional per property, which then brings it below the grey water if just doing it within a home. It averages out around about £4,000 additional cost per property if you do it on an on-plot basis. It's a similar from an on-plot basis for rainwater harvesting due to the additional storage that may be required. Obviously, there's less additional pipes, but the community scale actually came out a lot cheaper, and that's around the sort of £2,000 and even below that. Now, there are economies of scale in terms of the scale of development. We found that around the 100 property mark, that's when it really started to plateau, and around that £2,000 mark. But actually, even at the 40 properties, it was still cheaper than on-plot basis. It was still less than £4,000. We are currently refining that down and looking at smaller developments still to see where that sort of cut-off point might be. Now, these are only capital costs, and they are of a fairly small subset of costings. We tried to get 3 quotes for every single thing that we did here. And many people on the call will have fed into this, and I really appreciate your assistance on that. What we're looking at now is refining those capital costs a little bit further, but now looking at the operational and maintenance costs associated with them to get that whole life and that TOTEX element to it, and then looking at the whole life carbon and saying, is it a more sustainable solution? throughout, or is there a point at which it becomes more sustainable than your conventional supply? And I should say, not necessarily conventional supply now, the future conventional supply, which may well require a fair amount of RO from the North Sea. Could I have the next slide, please? We've also developed some guidance, which includes within it reference to reuse, which hopefully people have seen. This is alongside the Good Homes Alliance. It has a number of different model specifications in there to try and it's aimed at more the designers rather than necessarily well, in fairness, probably everyone on this call is worth having a look at it. It should be fairly user friendly. It's got some nice little snippets in there that you can take out. I would urge people to go and have a look at that. That only came out probably a month or two ago. Let's go next slide. I'm mindful of the time. I'm sorry. We've also been looking at the supply, the skills gap in this, and I think I won't dwell too long on this. It's quite a good report that WaterWise have pulled together on our behalf, but there's a real need to address this. I mean, I think the plumbing industry is in a bit of a bad place right now with a lack of kind of legislation or regulations around certification for certain dealings with water plumbing in particular. But there is a need to address this if we're going to see wide-scale rollout, because unfortunately it only takes a few horror stories before people start turning away from reuse. So we need to address this fairly quickly. But that report is also on the website as well, worth a read. Could I have the next slide, please? If you want to see where reuse schemes are currently up and running, I mean, the suppliers that are on this call, such as SDS, Storm Saver and Equality, probably also have case studies on their website with far more detail. But this is a map that we've pulled together with, and actually we'll probably reference back to those suppliers' websites for more detailed explanation of the sites. But you can see where these systems are up and running, well, and if they are running, and the sort of scale of them. So hopefully it was surprising how many there were, but also depressing that there aren't even more. So we need to be, that will be live, and we'll continually update that. Could I have the next slide, please? And I won't dwell on this, but there are a lot of other things going on in enabling water smart communities, and then it's not just about water reuse. You can see some of them here. One of which is water reuse that we'll be launching shortly is a water reuse safety plan template. For those of you who don't work in a water company, you may not be familiar with this document, but you require a water supply safety plan for all water companies. This is going, okay, let's have a look at it from a reuse perspective. It identifies the hazards and risks and then comes up with proposed mitigation measures for it. It's a template that all water companies can pick up and use, and actually might be quite useful for anyone trying to demystify some of the risks that people keep putting up there as to how they might be addressed. There's a whole heap of other things in there that you'll see, and they're coming out shortly in terms of water efficiency. There is a webinar series coming up with over the next couple of months, which I think there'll be. In fact, there we go. And yeah, there's a load of ongoing works that you can see there. I will hand over now to Matt. I apologize, Matt. I've possibly taken up more time than I should have done. But yeah, that won't have come as a huge surprise to you either. Thanks very much.
Thank you, George. So could I have the next slide, please? Perfect. So hi, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Matt Hull, and I look after industry engagement here at Storm Saver. We're a manufacturer of water reuse systems, and we've been in the field since 2003, and I have the job of helping to get legislation changed, which, as you can imagine, is quite a big task. So it falls to me to kind of close this off, really, and tell you how exciting the future is in terms of water reuse, because it is a bright one. And Storm and George mentioned some of the regulatory hurdles that are in place at the moment. And as an association, we've come together and really worked out, well, what's the roadmap? What does water reuse in the UK look like over the next few years? And what could those legislation elements look like to really influence water reuse for all new buildings? So that's the like golden tier standard, if you like. That's what we want. And if we have that, the the payoff is immense. I mean, we've done some calculations within the association, and if every new building, that's both non-household and domestic, had water reuse fitted, the saving potential could be 20.5% of the national deficit, which is predicted. So that's a huge chunk, but we have to act now. Commercially, we've been doing it a lot in terms of non-household, but there are still complexities there. People still can build these buildings and flush their toilets with drinking water, which is almost a crime, it feels like. So we put out this roadmap, and I'd encourage you to take a look at this full document via the UKWRA website. So in 2025, we'd like to see an introduction of a steering group for water reuse to advise His Majesty's government, and we've got a bit of ground on that. We've got a bit of traction in the form of the DWI working group that's we're currently involved in as an association. As George mentioned, they're on board with looking at water reuse, which is a really positive step. So as an association, we'll keep you updated on that front. As George mentioned, there's a huge skills kind of shortage or skills gap in the plumbing industry at the moment. And as an industry, we are very reliant on our installer community to get it right, not only for safety, but to ensure long-term savings are made for water as well. So we need a conversation around that, and we want that to happen by 2026. That's really key, and we need to be installing these systems properly and safely to enable us to do it at scale. 2027, that's the key year. That's when we're going to start hoping to draft legislation. That's when we as an association want to see a real draft of what legislation could look like. Now, currently there are 5 pieces of legislation that need slight amendments, some more than others. As George mentioned, the key headlines there: the Water Industry Act 1991, Section 218 and Section 68, if you want some bedtime reading. And the Part G of the building regulations is obviously a major one as well, a major influencing factor in how reclaimed water is used within new homes. So we can either do that through changing them 5 pieces of legislation, or we could have 1 piece of legislation that supersedes all of them. How we do that, that's up to the steering group, hopefully. So that's the aim. Once we have that in place, we have a bit more clarity of how this is going to work in practice from a legislative point of view. Then we're hoping in 2028 we can start to introduce mandatory water reuse for all new buildings, both non-household and household, in seriously water-stressed areas. Obviously, Storm covered earlier how much of the UK is actually seriously water-stressed, and then George covered how much growth we have to unlock. And if we had mandatory water reuse in those areas, the saving potential could be huge. Once we've done that, we'll then move to 2030, and 2030 is the key year. That's mandatory water reuse for all new buildings. The gold standard, which is no building in the UK, as much as feasibly possible, is flushing with drinking water, because that just doesn't make sense. Could I have the next slide, please? So that's regulation. So that's where we want it to go in terms of an association perspective. And we feel like that's really exciting. As an association, we've seen more traction and conversations around water reuse than ever before. So this is the exciting bit for me, really, and for all of us as suppliers and the association, is the innovation side of things. And this is really, really exciting. What can we expect then? Obviously, artificial intelligence is playing a key role in all of our daily lives. I'm sure some of you use it every day at work. But artificial intelligence in terms of monitoring of those control systems on rainwater harvesting, grey water recycling, and the smart attenuation systems, that can really offer us some benefits. That can offer us condition-based maintenance, which reduces the cost of maintenance over the long term, because you're only maintaining it when you really need to. It can spot faults early, so we're increasing the reliability. And it also gives access to live data as well. So artificial intelligence and the smart integration, giving people data when they need it and spotting faults early, is really key. That's one of the benefits, but the other benefit is that we can actually look at usage patterns and give the aim is to give people who are using systems some recommendations on how to best use the rainwater and the grey water and at what times of day. That's the golden tier standard and what we're aiming for, really. I think it's very clear. Once regulation comes around, there's going to be a lot of future development on the residential side, whether that be individual plot systems, on-plot systems. There's a real need for educating homeowners. Obviously, everybody in this call knows how difficult educating on water can be at times, but that's where putting information on these systems in the hands of the homeowner through their smart devices, through things like their smart connected homes, things like that. We think we're going to see more of that once the regulation changes to promote that residential side of things. As Lutz mentioned, clay farm collection from new sources for reuse. Obviously, I'd say a lot of systems out there currently are only collecting from roof areas or collecting from your grey water points as well. We are going to see more collection sources such as car parks and hard standing, just because it boosts the amount of available water that we have, and particularly in those seriously water stressed areas. So more treatment technologies to deal with them. Obviously, it's much more complex, so we have to factor that in. And then finally, new treatment methods. Obviously, all of us in the industry are really trying to innovate all the time, trying to treat more water in a smaller footprint on a daily basis. So all of those collectively make it a really exciting time for the industry and one to stay in touch with via the association. And that concludes my short but sweet update on water use regulation and innovation. So thank you.
Great. So thanks so much to all the presenters and everybody for listening in today. We've had a few questions in advance, which we'll take first of all. Our experts in the field here today on the call will be able to field these for us, and then we'll have a look in the Q&A section to see what's been put in the chat today as well. So the first question is, as water is so cheap, how else do we incentivize water reuse and water efficiency? So I'm wondering which of our esteemed panel would like to answer that.
I'll give it a go. Sorry, Jane, I may have to put you on mute. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, there's a bit of a feedback on your end. If honest, I don't know that we're ever going to get to a point where you really incentivize them to such a route that they do it from a financial perspective. I think there's an element of mandating it. So whether that's through the fact that actually there is no other water source available, such as commercial, or that actually you're limited in terms of how much water is available to the housing, which effectively requires the use of or the reuse of water. There are incentives that are available through water companies, environmental incentives for developers to incorporate these things, but they are, as much as anything, should be used in that stopgap for those early adopters. I don't see that as being the route to fund this going forward in the future. That is to start the process to get this more mainstream. But going forward, I think ultimately we're just going to have to factor in that actually water supply to the properties needs to have dual supply, and we should be future-proofing these just as standard. But yeah, in terms of water being so cheap, I mean, as an occupant, you're not going to see any difference in terms of costs, particularly from having a non-potable water supply. It may be a slight reduction, but I think we all know that the water bill is our cheapest bill, utility bill, so it's not going to see a huge difference in terms of people's pockets. Sorry, I'm sure others probably want to chip in there.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to comment on that from the speakers, or should we move to the next question?
I can, nothing more to add there, George. I think the problem is the price. As long as the price doesn't go up, then you're not going to see anything. The funny bit is that water is not really priced to what is available. Yeah, so I think it's one of the industries that really don't show the value of it, right? So water scarce areas, the water price should go through the roof. In other places it shouldn't, but not at all, right? Because of course it's been regulated and kept as affordable as is mentioned. Hence, yeah, I'm completely with George on there. We need something that will, make it more or less mandatory to kind of use that kind of water. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere.
I totally agree with both Lutz and George there. And obviously, from a non-household perspective, it's important to remember that new connections aren't guaranteed. So that is another influencing factor if you're a non-household customer of these water companies. So making sure that we're influencing it through other ways is really important, and that really is mandatory water reuse.
Great, lovely. Thank you very much, panel. We've got question 2. Putting aside perception, does black water treatment not offer more recovery scope than grey water?
It does, but I think it's a perception piece, and the level of treatment that's needed. So there is obviously quite an extreme amount of treatment that's needed. A good example would be to look at the Abbey Mills. Oh my God, my mind's got the London Olympic Park scheme, which did have black water treatment taking up the Northern Outfall sewer. That unfortunately is no longer running and there's not due to the fact they didn't work. It just was a business choice. It was only a 7-year research project. But yeah, I think we probably all agree that there is great potential with black water, but it's a perception piece, and maybe it's the thing that follows once we've really got all this dual pipe network in, because it shouldn't be. That's not the difficult bit then.
Yeah, I agree. I think black water is a little bit of a question of scale, right? Because I think from a small, because of the increased treatment demand, in larger scale. I mean, George probably can talk about the effluent reuse schemes that they are looking into. So on that level, of course, it makes a lot of sense. It's probably feasible, but the smaller you get, the probably more unfeasible it gets. So that's where another element to consider.
There is huge potential to reuse water that's currently being treated in sewage treatment works, and the effluent that comes out of that as a non-potable source. I think that if we are referring to that as black water treatment, then absolutely, and there's great opportunities right across our region and beyond. So, sorry, Matt.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, one point that there is to consider with black water, there's huge opportunities, isn't there? But the maintenance, how easy are these things to maintain long term? There are opportunities there on large scale, but on a kind of a localized scheme such as an 800 home development, is it feasible, and what is the maintenance considerations for that? And that's another question that we've got to ask ourselves as an industry.
Great. So we've got 4 questions left, and then a very brief summing up from Lutz. So I will ask you to be very brief in your responses, please, panel. So this is question 3. What is the most effective solution to maximise reuse that can realistically be implemented at a large scale? Thank you.
Go on, Jens. I've dominated.
Yeah, correct question is, what is large scale in terms of numbers per, in terms of units overall, or in size of project? How would you see that?
But if I've interpreted the question correctly, personally, I think stormwater harvesting is the thing that we need to be doing. We're already collecting stormwater. We're already having to manage it from a surface water flood risk perspective. Why not, rather than just putting it in a dumb tank that then occasionally the hydro brake starts functioning when it gets really extreme, why not reuse that water? And future-proof all these properties with dual pipe systems, then it's just a case of plugging that back in.
Definitely. The Anglian Water Report on non-potable runoff destinations, obviously, George, you worked very heavily on that, but that's always another good indication of what collection sources to prioritise as well, depending on what scale of scheme it is.
Great. We just had another one pop in the chat as well, so colleagues will be very grateful for brevity. So this is from Daria Johan. What does the panel think is the largest roadblock to scaling up water reuse in the UK?
Well, I think it's legislation. We do that on the commercial side very easily. I have done for many years, but on the domestic side, it's much more difficult until we have those those legislative changes. I'm sure lots will agree.
Yeah, I can agree.
And still.
Great. That was very brief and very perfect. Thank you. So this is from Brian Reed on the call. Thank you for the question. In commercial buildings, there isn't much grey water from showers or laundry. Is it worth investing in a grey water system, or should rainwater be the focus?
I think that is a question of size. So especially in London, with these high-rise building, rainwater harvesting is very difficult because of the limited amount of roof area. But in some buildings, you have quite a substantial amount of people in it. If you just take the HSBC Tower with 10,000 people under one roof, the amount of grey water that's being produced there by just hand wash basin usage and showering, they have a gym in the building, you do get a decent amount of grey water, and that has a bigger impact than the rainwater off the roof. So that's just literally using what you have to make it worthwhile. And in this case, it would be probably a good opportunity.
Look, so am I right in thinking that certainly Bloomberg, didn't they use the cooler water as well, the cooling system?
Yeah. Yes, the bleed off, the cooling water, bleed off water is being reused as well. Yeah, so that's another opportunity, of course, in a commercial building. So it's really it's a matter of what size you're looking at, because of course, grey water, for example, in an office with, let's say, 2 floors with less people under a big roof, rainwater harvesting by itself will do the job. But the minute you go high rise, grey water becomes more interesting. So dense, I think, dense populated areas, tend to be going down grey water because, of course, the infrastructure to collect the water is much smaller as well.
The other thing I'd add to that is it's not always a choice between one or the other. Quite often, your best solution is to go with a bit of both. You're already having to do the attenuation of the rainwater from a flood risk perspective. You can mix the two together. Obviously not quite, and I know it's not quite as simple as that, Lutz, and that, but and Storm for that matter, sorry. But there is, it's not the case of necessarily having to have grey water to meet your full demand, or rainwater to meet your full demand.
George, you beat me in the punch. That was exactly my point. It can be a combination deal. Obviously, it just depends on, as Lutz said, it's the building kind of defines the requirement. There might be blue roofs, there might be green roofs, there might be irrigation. So it really does depend on the spec of the building and kind of what your targets are.
Great, thank you very much. We've got 2 questions and we'd like to finish by 10 past. So this is from Mr. Gregor. Should property insurance providers consider incentivizing or requiring water reuse systems to water scarce areas, since reusing water can increase a property's long-term usability and value? Could this also reduce insurance risks and losses related to water shortages?
That's an interesting one.
That's tough.
Yeah,
that's very tough. That's a good question.
I'm stumped as well, to be fair.
And the reason I'm slightly stumped by it is I could also see them going the other way with it, and potentially placing a risk on supply aspects of it from a different, there is a certain element of, you just assume when you turn on the tap that it will always be running. Can you always assume that when you go to flush your toilet that's run by non-potable, that will always be running, and the insurance aspects associated with that. So, or the fact that you've got a potential treatment site either in the building or a community one, which may need replacements. So I think I could see them going both ways. I think it's probably an interesting one from a commercial insurance perspective, but maybe not on a household.
From an insurance point of view, I can see the combination of the SUTS element of reusing the water, because of the flood reduction in terms of making areas safer for buildings, right? So this is where I can see the immediate impact of an insurance to kind of cover rather against the losses on a building due to flooding, because you're using the water, hence zero runoff, targets and stuff. I don't know of how water scarcity or non-supply a insurance company would pay out for or something, in terms of value of the property. So
I think probably on the supply side, I definitely agree with you there, lots in terms of flooding and SUDS. But on the supply side, I'd say we're too early in that scarcity process right now. I think if it was going to happen, it would be in about 10, 15 years.
Great, thank you everybody. I've got the last question, then following the panel's answer of this question, I'm going to hand you over to Lutz to bring the proceedings to a conclusion. So again, from Mr. Brian Reid, the Bistra Syria project on buildings that save water back in 1999 had a payback period of around 15 years for grey water. Gentlemen say memory may not be good on this, but that's the rough kind of idea. Has this changed? Will it change if water bills rise? Please keep your answers brief, panel, because we'd like to finish by 10.
Well, 1999 water prices, London was really at the £2 mark, if at all, right? So prices are doubling currently. So of course, if you have a payback of 15 years with double the prices, you're down to 7. So, grey water recycling systems in certain areas of the UK, get to a point where it's getting interesting. That depends again of scale. Bigger systems are probably, have a better payback than, potentially smaller ones. But we've been going into the potential of having a payback, which was probably completely out of question by 1999. So that would be my answer. But again, horses, of course, or project related.
There's nobody else commenting on that. Lutz, please, could you bring the conclusion?
Yes.
Conclusion. Thank you.
Yes, I would love to. Well, first of all, as the chairman of the association, I'm very proud that we were able to have this week of water reuse, even being launched at Parliament with the MP Lee Pitcher, which I'm want to be thankful to as well, to give us the opportunity. We did have a launch in Wales, which is great. Lots of activities from all members trying to showcase, showcase projects, inform people, make people aware of what's happening out there and what's possible. So I love this week, and I'm looking forward to have another one in next year. Thank you very much for Jane to organize and pull it all off, especially with the Parliament. A big thank you to Enabling Water Smart Communities to join us in the effort. A thank you to every participant, and also, of course, for all the people joining today on the call. It is important that people come to this. I mean, we can organize whatever we want. If people don't show up, what can we, try to do this? So once again, thank you very much to everyone. And Jane, big stuff you've done there. And Sam, by the way, from SDS, I want to give him a praise here as well, because he was running this as the project that he couldn't be here. He's getting married. He's now married. Game over. But the point is, thank you very much for all of you. And I hope to see you at least latest next year for the next Water Reuse Week. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lutz. Take care. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.